Today we're going to use recycled skateboards and a little bit of steel to make a coffee table with storage in it. My friend Ben Paik at Wobi Designs turns old, broken, or cracked skateboards into these really colorful slabs. I've been watching his work for a while and was really excited when he gave me 3 of them. Ben has his own YouTube channel and I'll put a link to it in the description, but here's a quick overview of how he does it. He peels off the grip tape and does a little bit of surface prep before gluing them together and pressing them really tightly using bottle jacks and a steel press. He then resaws these big blanks on a bandsaw to make very colorful blocks that he uses in all of his projects. Shout out to Ben for hooking me up, and be sure to check out his channel. His process is quite time consuming, and I only had a little bit of material, and so for the design for the base I really wanted to come up with something that would accentuate the color and make this small amount of material go a long ways. Steel is my go-to material when I want to make something really thin and minimal. I had some leftover angle steel from the shipping container house build, and I thought it would work well for making little trays that would be handy for remote controls, pens, and stuff like that. I used my angle grinder to cut the pieces to length. For the ends of the tray, I'm just going to use flat bar, and once again, I just cut these with my angle grinder. Now this steel had been sitting in the scrap pile for quite a while, so it was pretty rusty, so I just used a flap disc on my angle grinder to brush it off in preparation for welding. I used magnets to hold it in place, and then tacked everything together using my Forney welder. My cuts weren't perfect, so I used some clamps to really force everything so that all the ends perfectly lined up. Once everything was tacked in place and it looked reasonably square, I then laid in some really heavy beads and then switched back to the angle grinder and ground them out nice and flush. I want the skateboard slabs to sit flat on top of these trays, so I'm going to have to cut out recesses for the hinges, which really wasn't that hard. I just traced their outline and then cut away with the angle grinder before clamping the hinges into place and welding them to the trays. I applied some cutting oil and then drilled holes through the hinges that will allow me to screw them to the skateboard slabs. For the legs and cross supports, I'm going to use 1-inch square steel tube. And instead of cutting it with my angle grinder, which is what I would typically do, I decided to try out my new Ryobi portable metal cutting bandsaw. It uses the same 18-volt batteries that my other Ryobi tools use, and it cuts through metal quickly and really cleanly. To increase the life of the blade, I apply a little bit of cutting oil, and then just line the blade up to my pencil mark and cut right through. I was so impressed with this tool, I decided to use it to get fancy, and I cut notches that will allow the trays to kind of recess into the frame. I was doing this freehand, so my cuts weren't perfectly straight, but I wasn't too worried because I knew I could take care of any gaps with either the welder or some Bondo. I switched back to my angle grinder and prepped the pieces for welding. I lined up the cross supports with the notches that I cut out and then welded the pieces together. I laid down a pretty heavy bead with the welder, but I just ground that out flush with my angle grinder. In addition to providing storage space, these trays are also going to be part of the structure. I placed the trays upside down and then used magnets to hold the legs on top of them and then welded the cross supports to the trays. There were some gaps between the recesses that I cut with the bandsaw and the trays, so I just used my welder to fill that in a little bit. Using Bondo would have been easier, but I already had the welder out and I always could use the practice. I wiped down the steel with mineral spirits and then applied 2 coats of Rust-OLEUM Rusty Metal Primer. This is my go-to primer for steel now, and I've had really good results with it. I did get a little careless on one of the legs though, and there were some drips, so I just sanded those down before painting the whole structure with Rust-OLEUM Protective enamel in flat white. While the paint was curing, I sanded the slabs up to 220 grit, wiped them down with a microfiber cloth to remove any dust, and then applied some water-based polyurethane. I really wanted the colors to pop, and I didn't want the natural wood tones to become too yellow, so I used Varathane water-based polyurethane in crystal clear matte. I found that this does a really good job of protecting wood without yellowing it too much. After the first coat had dried, I then did a light sanding with 300 grit sandpaper and applied a second coat. I placed the skateboard slabs, marked the location of the holes, pre-drilled the holes so I wouldn't split these precious slabs, and then screwed them to the hinges. For the bottoms of the trays, I'm going to use 1/8 inch thick plywood and some felt. I use clear construction adhesive to glue the plywood down to the painted steel, and then use contact cement to glue the felt to the plywood. I wanted to create a nice thank you gift for Ben Paik, so I just snapped a photo with my iPhone of one of the tabletops, and then opened up the YOSHIRT app. YOSHIRT is a really cool app that lets you design your own t-shirts, sweatshirts, yoga mats, and even shopping bags using images that you have on your smartphone. The whole thing's really easy and fast. You just pick the piece of merchandise that you want to design, pull up a photo from your library, and then just use your fingers to switch and arrange the way you want the orientation of that photo to appear. Once I got it nice, I then just added it to my cart and used Apple Pay to check out. About 7 days later, the sweatshirt arrived, and I can't wait to give it to Ben. Now obviously everybody doesn't have access to skateboard slabs, but I think the same concept would work well for just small leftover pieces of hardwood that had a really nice grain but aren't big enough to make a full woodworking project by themselves. With steel you can get such slender lines and minimal forms that are super strong but visually minimalistic that really let the scarce pieces of wood shine. I really like the idea of having storage in a coffee table, but my sister Jessie really wants to use this as a bench where she can hide her socks. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out our other videos and don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Thanks. Bye.